Republican presidential candidate and this senator from Texas, Ted Cruz. Great to see you, Senator. So what of that message, in particular by Governor Christie, which is essentially man up, stop complaining, get out there and just debate?
Oh, listen, Megan, I think that's exactly right. You know, the three debates that we've done so far, I think have been terrific. And from my attitude is that I'm happy to debate any of the candidates anytime and anywhere. And I think that is a good thing for the Republican primary field, where we display the breadth and depth of the field and the terrific talent we have.
Are you signing on to this letter?
No, I'm not interested in signing on to a letter of demands. You know, the one point that I have made, and I've made it several times, is why is it that we have Republican primary debates that are moderated by liberal Democrats? Liberal Democrats moderate the Democratic debates and they moderate the Republican debates. I don't think that makes any sense. And the one rule change that I think the RNC ought to think about is saying that if you have never in your life voted in a Republican Party primary, that you shouldn't be moderating a Republican primary debate.
But let me challenge you on that. Do you have any idea whether Bret Baier or Chris Wallace have ever voted in a Republican primary?
I have no idea, and I'm guessing you may tell me whether Megyn Kelly has.
So neither do I. I have no idea, but I can tell you as a fact that those are two of the most fair, talented journalists in the business. So under your rule, they could potentially be excluded from anchoring a presidential debate.
Look, they could potentially. My guess is that they have voted in a Republican primary. I can certainly tell you that Chris Wallace and Bret Baier and Megyn Kelly are not liberals. And the reality is that most journalists at mainstream media stations are liberal Democrats. You know, you look back to 2012 where George Stephanopoulos, who is someone I like personally, but he grew up and built his career as a political operative for the Clinton campaign, and in the Republican primary debate, you remember the question he asked out of left field, what is your view on birth control on Griswold versus Connecticut? Mm-hmm. And all the Republicans were puzzled. What are you talking about? They're scratching their head. No one was talking about this issue, and he kept pressing and trying to get Mitt Romney on the record. Well, we all learned in a couple of months what that was about, which is that was the opening salvo in the Democrats' made-up war on women, and that was sadly a so-called journalist behaving as a political operative.
But how would it work? Would we have to submit our voting records to you or some committee? I mean, we'd have to prove what primaries we voted in or didn't. Like, how would that really be impracticality?
It's not complicated. In a primary, don't have liberals moderating. Listen, I've suggested. How about
Tim
have a
Russert?
debate?
He was a liberal. He worked for Tim O'Neill. Obviously, you know, when Russert was alive, he was one of the most respected journalists. You wouldn't sit for a debate moderated by Tim Russert?
Megan, why not have, and listen, I'm happy to debate in front of anybody.
Right,
I go on MSNBC. I go on liberal shows all day long, but in a Republican primary debate, the object is to help primary voters decide who's the strongest conservative. You know what I've suggested?
And who could win the general, but also who could win the general.
Right. How about a primary debate moderated by Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and Mark Levin?
I don't think Rush wants to do it. Rush says he should moderate a Democratic debate. He doesn't want to talk to you guys.
Well, listen, the Democrats would be terrified to have Rush moderate their debate. We go on shows where liberals moderate them all the time. You know, Glenn Beck and the Blaze have offered to co-host an event. I think that would be a great debate.
I'd watch
Glenn
that too.
Beck and the Blaze doing it. But, you know, there are lots of smart conservative thinkers. Hugh Hewitt did the first debate, but he only got a handful of questions. Mm-hmm. I would have rathered 20 questions from Hugh Hewitt, deep, substantive foreign policy. The difference is, look, for a Republican primary voter sitting at home, you're trying to decide who's the strongest conservative, who's going to win this election and turn the country around. If you're a liberal Democratic journalist, every question you're asking is not aimed at that. It's aimed at beating up and bloodying the Republicans, weakening the nominee.
That's true if you're biased. Let me shift to policy now for you, because you unveiled your tax plan recently, and you are calling for a flat tax, which is basically a 10% income tax, 16% business tax. I guess you say that a family earning up to for the first $36,000 of income, no tax. And the critics of this plan say, well, it won't work because if you're going to do flat tax, you got to have at least a 20% tax across the board. Otherwise, you're not going to take in enough money to support the United States.
Well, listen, any critic who's saying that is not looking at the numbers, because I've put out the numbers. If you go to our website, tedcruz.org, You can see the exact numbers on the tax plan. My tax plan says that for a family of four, the first $36,000, you pay zero. No income tax, no payroll tax. Above that, everyone pays a flat tax of 10%. That means that billionaire hedge fund managers no longer pay a lower rate than their secretaries. And then the simple business flat tax of 16% applies across the board, so giant corporations no longer pay less taxes than small businesses. And those two simple flat taxes allow us to eliminate the payroll tax, to eliminate the corporate income tax, to eliminate the death tax, to eliminate the Obamacare taxes, and to enable every American to fill out his or her taxes on a postcard and to abolish the IRS. And the numbers are there. And you know, the best thing about the simple flat tax, Megan, is it produces incredible economic growth. The Nonpartisan Tax Foundation says the simple flat tax, the Cruz tax plan, would produce more jobs than any Republican on that debate stage.
But those are the people who, the Tax
jobs.
Policy Center, they're the ones who say in order for the government to raise as much money as it does now, the flat tax rate has to be higher than 20%.
Look, I agree. Well, that's if you don't have the business flat tax. But the business flat tax generates the 3/4 of the revenue needed to fund the government comes from the business side rather than the individual side. That's how we have a low 10% flat tax. And you know, the great virtue of that, we've seen under the Obama administration, the IRS is a political weapon targeting citizens. The simple flat tax would produce booming economic growth and would let us shut down the IRS, take that government power out of Washington. And it also ends the cronyism. It ends government picking winners and losers. And there's actually one other big advantage of it, Megan. The 16% business flat tax is border adjustable, which means anyone making exports doesn't pay it. That gives a huge advantage to manufacturers, farmers, and ranchers exporting. But then every import coming from China and foreign countries pays the 16% tax so that we compete on a level playing field. It would turn around our trade deficit and it would produce jobs and economic growth, turning this country around.
Senator Ted Cruz, it's always fun talking to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Megan. God bless.